We're here today with Carolyn Dahl, and if you've joined us before, we had a wonderful conversation about the importance of preserving our stories, and we got to hear Carolyn's poetry and hear a little bit about her background. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for joining us again and for continuing this very important conversation. It almost seems like in our first episode, we just got started on the topic of archiving and the things that we save and that we keep and the stories that it tells about us. But again, thank you for joining us again.
It's my pleasure. It's an important topic, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So let's get right into the whole aspect of archiving.
I think what's really important for me is that you understand in the beginning that I didn't think I was going to have an archive. It never, ever entered my mind, as perhaps it hasn't for those of you who are listening either, because I always thought, oh, you had to be really famous or you had to be someone who was a celebrity to have an archive. But I had a friend who said to me, yes, but what about you've just finished cleaning out your mother's house and your uncle's house. And one of the things you told me that was so upsetting is that you were the curator of all their treasures. And it was very hard for me to decide what I should keep, what I should move on, not knowing their stories, not knowing the significance of the objects. And so after I finished with that, which I found very, very stressful, I took some of them home with me because I was too emotionally attached and in grief to really decide. So I did the final decision at home, which worked very well too. But then I thought, you know what? Someone's going to be doing this for me someday. It's not fair to leave them to them. And also, it's not a way to preserve my stories, which is something that is very important to me. And I think that I need to do it myself. So I am what's called in the archive terminology a living donor. In other words, I'm alive while I'm doing my donation. Now, the value in that is that you can add all your own stories. You can write, you can curate it, you can organize it as you want and put what you want in it. And that's very valuable. So, as a living donor, I am able to decide what I want in my donations. But of course, you have to go way back into the process because there are two big aspects. One is finding a place for your archive. Do you want to do an archive? And what kind of archive do you do?
That's a very interesting component as far as the beauty. Well, so much in my head, I'm trying to keep it all in order because the importance of archiving ourselves and not waiting for somebody else to do it. Because as you mentioned, um, you're curating somebody else's treasures and it may not mean anything to somebody else. I know that whenever I travel, I like to buy a little piece of jewelry, and I realize that my daughter and my son or grandchildren, to them, it may mean nothing. And that I should probably start writing notes as to where and why and what it meant, because there's a story to each piece. And so I love that idea of being a living donor or curator for what we've accumulated. And that brings us to the whole topic of accumulating, because even before you find a place, you've got to sort through what you have. And
Yeah.
it's
And I have a real technique. I mean, I would say that this is almost a workshop, really, because there's so much information that I could give you. Because after I found the archive that I wanted to go to, which was my college one, the University of Minnesota, you have to kind of make an application, so to speak, to them. And you have to have materials that they would find useful for their research facility, because most archives are for the purpose of future people researching the past. So you have to have that. And then you have to kind of mold it to what they need as far as how you present your materials. In other words, almost everything needs to be archival rather. And then I discovered I spent a fortune on 3-ring notebooks because it's the way I organize my life. And I have a lot of art slides. If you heard the first podcast, you'll know that I was a singer and then an artist and now a writer. And so all my slides were on 3-rings. Well, they don't use them because they deteriorate. So all these expense I had gone through was thrown away. Also, don't worry about boxes because they all have their own boxes. Because if you've ever seen an archive, it's like little drawers and the boxes are lined up. They all have to be the same size. So they have their own and everything's archival. But then you have to figure out how you are going to go through it. And this is the thing that's really important that you need to decide if you decided to do an archive, what kind of archive do you want? 2 basic types. One is the personal. You're doing it for family. You're doing it for loved ones. You're doing it for relatives, for them to read, to know the history of the family and future generations, which means you can organize it any way you want. It can be scrapbooks. You can have people contribute stories. You can write it down. You can do videos. You can do absolutely anything because you're not pleasing an institution. But if you want a public one, the number one thing that you need to think about, and this was a really difficult one for me, is that exposure. Absolutely everything that you put in that archive is going to be available to strangers, available to their critique, their judgment, what they think of you in your life. So you have to be very brave and you have to look at it more like you are servicing the future rather than, protecting yourself. Also, you never own those materials again. They belong to the institution. So if you have something really, a letter from your grandmother that talked about something and it's so dear to you, you don't want to give it away in a public archive, or you want to copy it and save the original because you never get it back again. You can visit and they can photocopy things, but you have to really decide. That's the strong element. Like for me, one of the things is journals. I have boxes of journals. I've kept them my whole life practically. Now, part of my archive is my professional life, all the programs, exhibitions, all the things I've achieved, all the slides, the book manuscripts, my books, things like that. Okay, that's a particular image of me. Most people stop there because that's the only image they want out there, that, oh, you were good at this and you did this and isn't this wonderful, But there's the other side that the journals will present. The journals will present the real me, the crabby me, the whining me, the one who uses her journals for therapy, the ones who may record things that are, not as nice as you would want people to know. So I came to a real difficulty with that. But I teach journaling courses to people, and I have always told them there's no need to have a journal if you're not honest. If you're going to falsify a journal, don't do it. A journal should be a record of your life, as raw or whatever as how you lived it. We have enough of the official documentations and histories that are honed and cleaned up and slanted in whatever the way they want. What researchers want is the true, down-to-earth, ordinary person speaking. So I have decided my journals will go, but here's the catch. Here's what I could do. I don't have to donate them until I'm dead. So no one can go after me after I'm dead, right? And also you can put a hold on journals. If there's something that you feel is something you don't want read right away, you can say you can only read the journals in or activate them in 25 years. And the other thing I did is, against my archivist's wishes, because she wants you to leave them exactly as you wrote them, I am going through and blacking out some things, not about my life, because I've dedicated myself to total exposure as to who I am. But if there's something in there that I feel would be sensitive for a friend, a secret, something that they would not want exposed, I'm deleting them because I still believe in the old-fashioned viewpoint of privacy and consideration. But think about that, just where you want your journal, how much exposure, and then you have to begin the process of the collecting, culling, sorting, organizing. And I will tell you, it took me a long time.
I can see how this would be beneficial in a workshop. Sign me up.
Well, we can do that too.
Sign me up because you talked about exposure and really putting yourself out there. But I sense a willingness to do it for future generations' learning purposes and a preservation of history of that. So that's a really important point to take into consideration, because the things that not only our journals, but the things that we collect, aside from the professional items, talk about our history, talk about who we are.
They do. And that's the thing that I need to maybe clarify, is that there are two types of archives that we're talking about here. An archive is technically papers. It is technically a collection of your papers, programs, letters, things like that. Now, the objects you accumulate, which is a problem for me because having been an artist, I have a house full of artworks. Now, they're another issue that you have to find a place for. They won't be archival usually, unless, say, you're a costume designer, and then there might be some of your costume sketches. But that's a whole nother thing that I have yet to deal with, is what do I do with my objects? Because lots of times now, my objects are not going to be things the next generation necessarily wants that I find beautiful. My artwork, it's not easy to donate to facilities. You think, oh, I'll just give it to them, they'll take it. It doesn't quite work that way. So you have that also. So you kind of have both. And I also want to say that, when you're thinking about your papers, let's go back to the paper archive, is that one thing that struck me, and perhaps was the thing that made me bold or made me say, I'm just going to expose myself in years of journals, is that a researcher told me once that people may come to my archive not for me. They're not going to come for Carolyn Dahl to write this big book about my whole life, unfortunately, unless it's someone that needs to know something about the textiles I did or the books I wrote or something like that. But for the most part, they are going to come to our journals, to the materials we have, to know the times. What was it like for Carolyn Dahl to live in that particular time period? What did it feel like? What was she thinking about? What did she think about politics? What were her interactions with life? How did she write down Houston, her experiences? California, what was it like in the early 70s in California or something? So in other words, they would be getting a first-hand report. Just like, remember, during the Civil War, all PBS has all these programs, and they're reading the letters of the soldiers. And that's where we learn about the war, not what we learn about in our history books. That's where we hear the emotions of the war. And that's what I'm hoping my journals and letters and papers like that will do. Let's put the motion back into the papers, the motion back into the stories. And that's what I want. So that's why I'm still tentatively exposing myself, so.
And thank you for doing that and for motivating us to do that. And again, we could take this conversation in two different spectrums because I want to learn more about your culling process, but I also want to learn more about that whole aspect of the archiving for future historians. Because we talked about this even before when we first talked on the phone about how few women's stories are saved. We don't take
Right.
that, we don't even think about that. And
You know, something interesting to me when I was talking about should I or shouldn't I archive or whatever, a man said to me, "You have to." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because there are so few women archives that if you think you have something to put in an archive and some information for the future generation and future women, you need to do it." And here's the other interesting for me talking, because I talked to some other archivists, not just mine, because I needed to learn about what should go in it. And they said something that really struck me. And that was, we are in a technological society, but as you well know, with cell phones and all the equipment and that, it goes out of date. So in other words, I have a lot of my artwork on CDs. They're out of date now. You know, the computers don't even play CDs anymore. But what this archivist said, because I said, "Oh, I suppose I have to have everything on a technological form for them to store it so it doesn't take much space." And they said, "No, that's not what we want. That will disappear. That will change. If you think of a time period of 50 years, think of how much technology will have changed." Said, "We can't keep up with it. We can't update our technology every time we turn around. So consequently, we like paper. Paper doesn't change. You can go into a box and there are the letters, there are the words. Everybody can read it." And I just went, "Oh, you're my kind of people. You're my kind of people. I love paper." But that was a revelation to me.
yeah, and
I
I
never
think
thought of it. And they wanted the real thing. They wanted to be able to touch it. They wanted to touch the letter. They wanted to see the handwriting. In fact, they sent me back on my manuscripts from my books. There would be the edited copy, and then there would be the proofs, and I would maybe do one or two things on that proof from my editor. Then the publisher would send me the final proof, and there would be basically nothing on it if there were no changes. Well, they sent me back the final proof and that almost to the final proof as not needing it. And I said, "Why? That's part of the process. Won't people want to know how you make a book that you go through all these stages?" But the reason is they want my handwriting on it. They want my editor's mark. They want evidence of a human being. That's interesting too, isn't it? I love it. I just love archivists. I mean,
absolutely,
they're my
absolutely.
favorite people now, but that's so interesting to me. And these were, just some of the things I learned. I learned so much from them.
Oh, I can imagine because I have heard of archivists who print out emails and because they want the printed version. They don't want an
Yes,
electronic version of even the emails. And think about how that's how we communicate. We don't have the long handwritten letters anymore. Maybe the occasional greeting card, but it's a lost art form. And we do have the emails. If we don't print them out,
yes.
it's all
And
erased.
I do. The ones that are dear to me are my friends, or I have a lot also in my journals of poetry information from Zooms or classes or poets that is advice, on how to write poetry or how to write in general. So I print them out also if I've typed it up, but I also print correspondence with very dear friends, or say it's correspondence, and there was something in it that is so beautiful. They put a story about their mother in, or the way they've expressed themselves just touches me. And I want to read it over and over and over. I don't want to read it one time and my computer will lose it. So I print it out. and I print it out in a little smaller form so that I can get it in my journal. But my journals are more like scrapbooks. There's a lot of glue-ins and there's pictures and, there's everything. But I say right now, start saving them. You have a child who's writing home to you by email, if they still use that, run it out. It's precious. Don't just delete them, save them, because those are our letters.
Absolutely. And I keep thinking too, not only emails, but the text messages. I think
Print
of all
them.
the text messages with my daughter and these text messages, as you know, they're real and unedited. They're unscripted. But they're not going to be around unless we preserve them in some way. They're not going to be around.
No.
That's me. Well, in our time together, I do want to talk a little bit more about the culling process.
Culling process is long in the way that I did it. Now, some of you might have a shorter method, but there was a way I had to process it in order for me to pull it all together and present it to them in a form that I felt was useful to them. And I'm a very organized person when it comes to things like that. And I was told by the archivist, the more organized you have it, the quicker you will get online, with your archive. And they don't have to do as much work. So they love it too. But the first thing you have to do, find a space where you can do your archive, an extra bedroom, tables, someplace you can put it out and not move it again. Now, I used my bedroom and put up an extra table, and then I used my beds too. They boxes, and they were all labeled. My art career, my theater career, early childhood, college, whatever. Then I dug out little by little everything out of the closets, drawers, and you never know where you're going to find some of the information, letters, things like that. Then I started dropping them into the boxes. This is a letter from so-and-so that goes in early childhood. This is a program from theater that goes in there. And I did what I call clump categorizing. And that means just everything, don't sort it, just everything in that topic. So I went through all the boxes in the closets doing that. Then I started finer. I would take one box and then I would work on that and putting them in piles, sub-piles. And then I really like to put them in Ziploc bags because I can see them and label them. And then I would start building the boxes that I would be delivering. But in every one of them, I did an archive. And not an archive, an inventory. Here's the reason. You do an inventory to help the archivist, but also to remember what you gave them. So if you say, like I come across one of my poetry books and I'm going, did I give them one of these? Or is this the only one? I can go back to my inventory and not send another one that they might send back saying they already have. They only want one of everything. So little by little, you start making it finer and finer in your sorting until you get the boxes that you need, that you're ready to send. And you have all the information together, you have it categorized, you have it labeled, and it's easy for them. And it's a life review. Be prepared for emotion.
Well, that's a whole other conversation. And I think that we are going to have a third episode because
We are.
Such an important topic, because we do want to talk about the emotion connected to that, because it's hard to let go of certain things. Because of the history, the story, what it might mean to one person. It has nothing, it doesn't have any significance to somebody else. I often go thrifting, and it breaks my heart sometimes, some of the things that I find, because as you said, newer generations are not going to appreciate or even know what the story behind it is. And I've been to several estate sales as well. And uh I just it reinforces the need to start archiving and preserving and sorting now and doing it ourselves.
It does. And also do it while you start it early, while you're still healthy, because as you get into the second half of your life, you never know if suddenly something comes up. So if you're doing it over a period of time when you have the energy and the interest, and you can also track down things, like well, I don't think we have time for it, but my using a magnifier on photographs. And there was a whole family story that was revealed when I started using that. And you discover things that you want to follow up on and track and find out what is the story, what's going on here, So you want to have enough energy to really pursue it, because it does become almost an obsession. You really just start. I mean, I started really getting into it and just finding all these little pieces to the puzzle, and I started to understand my life so much better, and my parents and everyone in my family.
Absolutely. I remember when I read Mara's story on you and on archiving, that story that you shared about being like a detective with the magnifying glass and finding things in the photo that set the time frame and gave you more clues to what was happening at the time.
Do I have time to tell the story of
Please,
that one?
yes, let's tell that story, and then we can come
Go
back to
tell it
another
and
episode on
final.
the emotions.
Now, this is how doing the archive can fill in a lot of gaps in your own story, your history. You will hear many stories through the family or myths or whatever, and you're kind of going like, yes, but where's the truth of it? Is it true? We really don't know. All right. When Mara did this beautiful story on me, there was a picture that I had found of my aunt leaning against the tree. Well, I used the magnifier on it because there were two trees there. And I used to sit, this was at my grandmother's, I used to swing in the hammock there. And, it was just perfect with the two trees. And I always wondered about, well, they're just planted so perfectly, these two trees. So I started using the magnifier and I was really looking. And all of a sudden, I looked toward the back of her and I went, oh my gosh, this has solved something that I now can say is true. Okay. And that is that in the Dahl family, there were all these rumors that my grandfather wanted to join the circus and that he trained all his children in the circus arts because he was going to take the whole family and they were going to join the circus. All right. So I look up at these two trees, and what is there? A trapeze bar, not a child swing, a trapeze bar. And so I knew in that moment that story was true. He really had trained them to go to the circus. And it's interesting because in my life, not knowing this story, as such as truth, I always wanted to join the circus. My first career desire was to ride the pink painted elephants and wear a sequin gown. And if you will go to my website, it's just simple Carolyn Dahl and then studio.com, Carolyn Dahl studio.com. Go to the book, A Muddy Kind of Love, scroll down, you will find a little poem video. And it's my poem from the first poem from the book, this book with the frog on, in case you need to identify it. And it's about my yearning to be in a circus. And a friend of mine worked it out, and she's got all kinds of circus video behind it. It's really like a little movie or something. But it's also a very good idea for those of you who are technologically good. You can do little videos of your objects in the background or the story, and then you do the story reading it in front of it. So check that out on my website, because I think, first of all, you'll have a lot of fun on it, but you'll also be able to connect it to the story of magnifying the backgrounds of your photos.
Carolyn, it's been a real joy. I mean, just, and I look forward to our next conversation. You've given us so much to think about. Definitely worth pursuing, organizing a workshop or getting more in depth about this, because I especially like what you said towards the end about you make new discoveries as you did. And so who knows what discoveries are waiting for each of us when we embark on this, I think, this adventure of archiving and culling through what we've collected over the years. Well, I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Well, thank you, Brenda.